Our next guest here on CompuBox TV really doesn't need an introduction. He's the man that does the introductions in the ring. He's the one and only Michael Buffer. Mike, thank you so much for joining us on CompuBox TV.
That's good to talk to you.
Now, it's been a great year in the sport of boxing. 2017 has delivered on so many fronts. I want to ask you, what has been your favorite fight of the year so far?
I think without a doubt the best one so far was, we always like to look toward the heavyweight division for a big fighter, a big star, but Klitschko and Joshua in April was just an unbelievable heavyweight fight. It had everything you want, the electricity and atmosphere of 90,000 fans in Wembley in the UK, and Vladimir somehow reached back and pulled out a great effort. And even in losing, he went out on his shield, but he went out like the star that he was.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's my personal fight of the year. The heavyweight division. You factor in an old guy that's been on top in so long for Klitschko, fighting the young lion, and Joshua. Knockdowns in back-to-back rounds and 90,000 fans. I mean, you absolutely nailed it there. Absolutely fight of the year for me. A lot of things that fans don't realize is when you're done with your duties in the ring, once you've introduced the fighters, is that you have had a ringside seat for the last 30 years of some of the greatest fights of all time. I almost look to you as like almost the ambassador to boxing. You work with all the networks, you work with all different promoters. Talk a little bit about your love for boxing.
Yeah, even it probably started at my age back in the 50s, watching a little black and white TV, and Rocky Marciano, Sugar Ray Robinson, Gene Fulmer, so many great fighters on TV on the Friday night and Saturday night fights. I just became really hooked on boxing, and my first real, fighter that I just loved was Floyd Patterson, and I lived and died with Floyd Patterson. And through the years, it probably that affection for a fighter went into Muhammad Ali, starting out with him in the Olympics as Cassius Marcellus Clay. And so for me to end up in a dream job, it's just a dream come true. So yeah, you're right. I get to do my job and then sit down and become a fan and watch these fights. And through the years, there's been quite a few really good ones over 35 years now.
Now, I don't know if you knew this, but Ray Leonard said, when Michael Buffer introduces you, you know you've arrived. Now, do you think about the role that you play in some of these fighters' careers?
Yeah, I find it really flattering when an Olympian or a young fighter is starting out, that you really have the feeling that he's going to be a star, and he comes up and he tells me, he says, I can't wait to get to that moment in my career when you introduce me and say, let's get ready to rumble. That's I kind of have to pitch myself and say, wow, this kid is thinking that far ahead, and that I'll be a part of this moment. It's very flattering. Yeah.
It must be so flattering. And you talk about your trademark, obviously, let's get ready to rumble. And, it's been well documented, and obviously it's so famous across the world. Talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, share with us everything that went into Let's Get Ready to Rumble, all the other catchphrases that you might have used. What was the process of coming to that, such a famous catchphrase like that?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but, when I started doing this in 1982, all the ring announcers were introducing literally everybody that had a credential from the state and national and federal commissions. And sometimes it would be up to 22 names being announced before you meet the fighters, the stars of the show. And this was just in an age where we started having fighters come to the ring with music and atmosphere, maybe even fireworks going off, and there's all this energy in the room. The ring announcer would just kill the crowd because you have to, all of a sudden, now there's no music. Here's the announcer. Here's, Michael Buffer or Chuck Hull or Ed Darien and Jimmy Lennon, and we're introducing people that nobody cares about. The chairman of the commission, 4 commissioners, executive director, 4 doctors, 3 judges, the fighters, WBC president, supervisor, WBA president. You see where I'm going?
Mm-hmm.
You've just wiped out all the energy in the room. So I wanted something that would be comparable to gentlemen, start your engines. You know, when you hear that phrase, you know it's iconic, and you know it means now the race is about to begin. So I wanted something that would just let the fans know that when I say the early phrases that you mentioned were, you know, man your battle stations, or ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts. I wanted to come up with something that would let the fans know now you're going to meet the stars of the show, the people you were all excited about when they walked into the ring. And, you know, I fine-tuned it with Let's Get Ready to Rumble. I remember the famous Muhammad Ali used to say he was, I'm so pretty, I'm ready to rumble, rumble, young man, rumble. And there was that phraseology out there. So I fine-tuned it to Let's Get Ready to Rumble. That's what you hear today.
Wow. I mean, just that's magic right there. Did you when did you know that it took off? I mean, obviously there's no social media back then, so you don't have fans, you know, reaching back to you to tell you I really liked Ready to Rumble. Like, when did you know that was the call?
Yeah, you know, I really, if you probably can go to YouTube and look up some of these old fights, and you'll see I used to say, let's get ready to rumble, 12 rounds of boxing for the, and I would just go right into the fight, you know, like what's coming up, and not have that pause to let the crowd react. And what happened was, this was probably in the early 90s. I became friends with a gentleman out here in Los Angeles. He since passed away, Jody Berry, and he was a singer, an entertainer. And he was one of these old Hollywood type guys, and he had been very, very successful in the 50s and 60s in what was still a big thing in live entertainment called dinner clubs and supper clubs. And he would open for like Ella Fitzgerald and you know, some of the great names. And in a while he was also a headliner himself. But he had this grasp of performing. And one time we were out having a couple drinks after one of those legendary 10 Goose boxing shows. I'm sure your dad remembers, out at the old country club.
Oh yeah.
In Reseda, California. And Jody said to me after he had a few drinks, and he was saying, "Oh, Michael, when you say let's get ready to rumble, shut the expletive up." And I'm like, "What do you mean, Jody?" He said, "Well, people want to react." So that's when I started to say, let's get ready to rumble, and I would pause, and sure enough, it would get a response. And, you know, I'm always open to learning things, and even you know, I've been with my wife now 14 years, and more than 10 years ago, she said to me, when you say, before you say, let's get ready to rumble, you say, ladies and gentlemen. I used to go, ladies and gentlemen, like that, just kind of like, it was like a dramatic thing. And then, let's get ready to, and she said, say ladies and gentlemen with more energy, because everybody really kind of wants the whole thing to be. And I was like, well, okay. So you never know where you're going to get good advice.
That's amazing.
And so I picked up on that too. So I'm always willing to learn, but it's an evolving process, and it just, you know, through the years, I've been lucky enough to say it for Stanley Cup playoffs, championship games, and NBA. I just did the Golden State Warriors last championship series where they won every game that I opened the game with that, NFL playoffs, the World Series, and it's just been a great role.
Wow, it's been amazing and you look back, just to look back at how you started it and where it's taken you in your life. And when you're out there and you're in Monaco and you're on your balcony and you're sipping some tea, do you ever look out and say, wow? I mean, just pinch yourself and say, what a life that has all started from this catchphrase and your talent.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there's just a lot of pinch me moments where, you know, it's just hard to believe these things happen. So, yeah, Christine and I just were in Monaco for a week. So it's crazy how things work out. I had to work in London, and then Matchroom had a show the following week in Monaco. So I ended up actually spending a free week, my birthday week actually, in Monaco, and just
Amazing. A little rapid fire questions with you. Favorite venue for boxing?
You know, uh, there's been a lot of good ones, but I guess there's still the magic of the mecca of boxing, Madison Square Garden in New York City, for a sold-out fight. My first really big show was June of 1983, and it was another one of those comeback fights for Roberto Duran, where everybody said, "Oh well, he's finished," and he was coming back to fight Davey Moore for the junior middleweight title. And Davey Moore had been one of these young fighters that won a world title in only his ninth or 10th fight or something, and he was just chiseled steel, and he was a tough guy, and they figured, well, Top Rank put the show together, and it was like, well, does Roberto have one more left in the tank? He had already had the No Mas fight, and he was, everybody was looking down on him. Then he started coming back. Then he had another loss. I forget who it was. They figured he was through, and out of nowhere, the fight became a total sellout. The crowd was insane, and that's the magic of Madison Square Garden. It's electric. You say the Garden, or you write down MSG, and everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to a New Yorker, so I know all about the Garden, and especially Miguel Cotto. I've been to, I'm only 30 years old, but I'm lucky enough to have been to 8 of Cotto's fights at the Garden. He's a brand in New York. But one more rapid fire.
You were sitting there ringside when you came up to my elbow, so I know you're familiar with Madison Square.
I know. I mean, I was just talking about it with my dad and my brother, and they're here in the studio. And on a personal note, we would go to the fights, to the old ESPN fights in the 90s, and I would be no more than maybe 8 or 9, and Nick would be 12 or 13, and you would walk by, and I would hit Nick and say, "Oh my man, it's Michael Buffer," and you would come over and talk to us, and Nick would do his little drawings, and here we are talking today. It's amazing, right?
Yeah, I remember Nick the artist, and here you are in the game with your dad. And it's just crazy how things evolve through the years, isn't it?
It's crazy, and the craziest thing is you were kind enough to do the wedding intros for my brother's wedding. So everything just comes full circle when it comes to boxing.
Yeah, you're making me feel like a real geezer now. You know that?
I mean, come on, man, you look great these days. You kidding?
Thanks.
But I do want to ask you, what's the craziest thing someone? I know they pay you to do all sorts of appearances, but I know there's also people that reach out to you to do some quirky things. What's the craziest thing someone has paid you to lend your voice for?
Probably, through the years, there are people out there with deep pockets, and they want to do some fun things for their kids, and I've had people pay the price for me to fly across the country and be there for their kids' bar mitzvah. One was an 11-year-old, his birthday. His father was a hedge fund manager who had a mansion in Connecticut on a lake, and they brought me in. I remember I did wrestling, part of WCW wrestling, for a 7-year period along with the boxing. And so this guy actually, I threw a number at him that I figured there's no way he's going to go for it, and he did. And then on top of that, he brought in John Cena and Hulk Hogan, and I mean, these guys were getting hundreds of thousands of dollars back in those days for personal appearances. And so he spent the money. That was a pretty crazy event in some guy's supersized basement in his mansion in Connecticut. So that was pretty crazy.
Wow.
But you know what? They talk about crazy. And, I'm not sure if you were there or not, but your dad was, at Madison Square Garden. People always say, what's the craziest thing that's ever happened? And there are 2 of them. And that would be Fan Man, Caesar's Palace, with Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe 2, where the guy came down and crashed into the ring, and somehow nobody got injured. And then Madison Square Garden with Riddick Bowe and Andrew Galata, and a total guys on duty at the Garden. No police, were in attendance working that night. So that was a pretty crazy night.
Yeah, I was very young for those, but I remember the Fan Man and being scared because, I'm 7 or 8 years old. So I couldn't understand what I was watching the pay-per-view at home and with my brothers, and I didn't understand what was going on. So that was crazy. And then the Bo Galata, that's when you get really scared because you know that my dad is there. And I just remember his stories of him grabbing the computer and just bolting out of there. I mean, there's so many crazy things that happen.
Yeah, and because people rushed the ring and were like all over the place. And one of the famous things about that, you can still go to YouTube and catch this, is the HBO broadcast. George Foreman wraps his arms around Lampley, and guys are like climbing up on the tables and trying to get in the ring and everything, and you can hear George saying, "You don't want to do that, son."
A classic.
And he's protecting, like people are trying to like climb over him or step on the desk, and I mean, I can just imagine some schmo trying to push George Foreman aside back in, that must have been like what, 19?
I think it was 96.
When was it?
I think it was 96.
96.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I was 9 years old.
It was an amazing night.
Yeah, I would like to see the other side of that camera, the guy's face when George Foreman said, "Don't go there, buddy."
Big George, I think, yes, sir, Mr. Foreman. I'm sure he stepped back.
Michael, I can honestly go on and on with these stories all day long, but I know you're a very busy man. I appreciate you taking some time out and talking with me, and I'm looking forward to seeing you ringside as usual.